Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So let's just give it one more minute before we start. We'll kick off very soon. Thank you. All right, so I think I'll get started while people are still dropping in and signing in. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Johanna Siliakus. I work as consultant for the Transport Sector Office at the Asian Development Bank. And I would like to warmly welcome you to this webinar on gender and inclusivity in electric vehicle adoption by Heather Allen. As the countries in the region move towards decarbonizing their economies, it will be key to ensure that we leave no one behind. That is, that we can ensure that there is a just transition to a decarbonized world. For transport, there are many different angles that you can look at this from. And in today's webinar, we will hear more about how a just transition to e-mobility would look like. This is an area that still receives quite little attention when planning e-mobility projects and policies in our developing member countries, but around the world, basically. So we are extremely excited to initiate this discussion also as part of this webinar series. And the webinar series is presented under the umbrella of the e-mobility support and investment platform for Asia and the Pacific, which aims to build capacities and support scaling up of financing to e-mobility initiatives. The platform is operated by ADB and is financed by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. And if you want to join the e-mobility community under the platform, in order to stay up to date on the platform's activities, please fill in our needs assessment survey where you can leave us your contact details in case you have not done so already. So the QR code to the survey is now available on the screen, and we'll also post a link to the survey in the chat soon. And for the end of this year, we still have 2 more webinars lined up as part of this webinar series. So the next one is on green financing for EVs, which comes up on the 29th of November. So we'll also share Zoom registration links on these for these 2 sessions through our chat function here. And today's session is moderated by Tom Fleming from our implementation partner, Integrated Transport Planning. So Tom, over to you to lead us through the rest of the session. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jana, and yeah, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. So just to begin with a few house rules. So your microphone will be muted during the course of Heather's presentation, but we will open it up if you want to ask a question at the end. Please do pose any questions that you have for Heather in the Q&A function. You can ask questions as we're going through the presentation or at the end. I will pick these up as part of the moderated Q&A with Heather after the presentation. But you can also raise your hand during the Q&A to ask a question as well. However, this function won't be available during the course of Heather's presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so today, as Jenna has alluded, we're joined by Heather Allen. Heather is an esteemed gender and urban transport specialist. I know many of you will know of her and her work. She's an independent consultant with over 2 decades of global experience in gender, urban transport and sustainable development. She has worked as an international gender and transport expert for the World Bank, ADB, UN Women, amongst many others. And she's currently collaborating with UNEP on the e-mobility as a driver for change towards a gender transformative and just transition to electric mobility program. So Heather will present to us today on the topic of gender and inclusivity in electric vehicle adoption. Heather, thank you very much for joining us today. I will hand over to you.
Perfect, thanks a lot. So let me just try and make sure that we have, can you see my slides?
I can't, Heather. I can see only you.
Okay. So let me just fix that? How's that?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, fine. So yes, thanks a lot for the introductions, and I know that we don't have a huge amount of time for actually what is a really big and interesting topic, and I hope that the questions from the audience will demonstrate that. Let me just check. Whoops, hang on. I'm just. Okay, so let me just kick off with a few caveats about this presentation. So I've got about 20 minutes or so. It's a really big issue, so I wanted to focus down a little bit, although the title does say gender and inclusivity in e-mobility. I'm just really concentrating on women and the transition to e-mobility in this particular presentation. We're perfectly conscious that the word gender is used a lot as a proxy for women. It doesn't actually mean women. I'm not going to go into all that now. And of course, when we're talking about inclusiveness, then we need to include all the kind of wider community of particularly underrepresented groups in transport and others. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of the context to put hopefully a kind of frame around why we need to actually consider women specifically in this transition to clean mobility. And then go through some examples and some of the challenges and come up with a couple of recommendations of how we can maybe move forward on this. So why do we need to even consider women anyway? Well, for a start, we're nearly half the world population. So we're very, very slightly lower than the number of men. But as you look at the different ages, in fact, there are more women over 35 than men. That's the kind of tipping point. Why is this? Because men are actually extremely good at killing themselves in road accidents, with accidents and crashes. There are also, unfortunately, and in today's world, there are a lot of wars around, so they also get picked off there. So at the end of the day, if we look at it through the urban lens and we look at it through the disaggregated population lens, women, particularly in Asia, are an enormous market, and they are very much a future market. This data map shows the density of women in the Asian Pacific region. So don't say we're niche. We're not niche. We're actually just as much a market as men are. We also know that women particularly are most likely to be living in urban areas, although there are a lot of agricultural women, agriculturally active women, obviously in the rural areas. They're also more likely to be single heads of households, and in that respect, they are more likely to be a larger share of the poor. And this means that they have lower levels of education, and they also have less opportunity for actually earning the incomes that they need. And we all know about the gender pay gap. So that kind of puts it a little bit in the context. Please don't think of this issue as a niche issue. And please don't think of this as, if we do everything as we're doing it now, it will be fine, because it won't. Why won't it be fine? One of the main reasons is obviously if we're wanting to achieve the SDGs, almost all the SDGs require the inclusion of women. There are a number of them which are specifically dedicated to women, but actually if you take the lid off, you'll find that nearly all of them have got gender components. So if we want to reduce poverty, we need to look at the issues of women and that they're facing, particularly in urban areas. If we want to include, increase the education, then again, we need to look at women. If we want to have just and decent work, then again, we need to look at women. Women are very, very active. They're more active in the informal markets than the formal markets. So there are, so many reasons that I could give you as to why we need to actually look very closely at this gender issue. And we also know that insertion into the labor force is an absolute key lever for addressing poverty. And how do you get people into the labor force? You need to get them mobile. There are more immobile women, particularly in Asia, than mobile women. And we haven't got very good data on this, so I'll come back to that. But we need to really make sure that in order for women to be able to access the education that they need, to access jobs, to access health facilities, to have a better work-life balance, to manage the caring that they need, transport is a huge component of that. And we want to make sure that that transport is clean. And this is where electric mobility comes in. So we need to really make this very relevant to transport development in obviously Asia Pacific, but also everywhere. It's not just something that is going to happen, and we need to take specific actions and measures. You know, in transport terms and transport language, everyone always talks about, well, supply and demand. But when you add a gender lens to it, I would say that it's very much two sides of the same coin. So let's look a little bit more deeply as women as users, which is often the kind of the demand area. And if we're going to look actually at women as usuals, I'm going to dismiss immediately the fact that women are the greater public transport users in most of the world. They make more shorter trips than men, almost all over the world. In Asia, there are some kind of outliers where women have very little agency outside of the house. So there are some sort of kind of context-specific lenses that you could put on for that. But let's face it, particularly as women become more empowered and have greater access to education, they are picking up very much using 2- and 3-wheelers. We have a lot of examples in places like Cambodia. We've seen the growth of e-rickshaws, and there are a number of programs and initiatives in India. In Nepal, we know that, for instance, they've been working since 1990 on the introduction of e-vehicles, these small kind of buses that they have there. And now women are playing quite a strong role there. Out of 600 or so of these little buses, about half are now driven by women, and 200 of that 600 actually are women owners of them. There are a number of social enterprise kind of initiatives. Even cargo is such a thing. So women particularly rely on the first and last mile services of public transport, and that's where the 2- and 3-wheelers come in very often. They will also benefit because they're looking after children and the elderly a lot from better local air quality, which is what we know e-mobility aims to achieve. The e-mobility also brings lower noise levels, which particularly benefit children and the elderly. And we know there's a lot of correlation between sleep patterns and education and mental health. And women generally are actually very supportive of environmentally friendly activities, technologies. We care about the planet still being there for our children. It's not to say that men don't care, but we have a deeper concern about that. So that's actually a positive and could possibly accelerate the take-up of e-mobility if we target and use the right language to talk to women and build capacity there. So look at it the other side of the coin, women as providers or part of the supply chain. There's been quite a lot of work. So example, this picture comes from Transjakarta, where they've been investing in building capacity with women drivers for both their e-buses and their other BRT buses. Over 70% of Transjakarta passengers are female. So they want to see a role model that they can actually engage with in this public transport service offer. So there are a number of these big bus, electric bus and other types of driving initiatives around the world. The operators have actually said that they feel, particularly when it comes to e-buses, that the benefits of having female drivers include that female drivers tend to have better driving habits, which results in lower maintenance, lower tire wear, lower maintenance of the fewer moving parts that an electric engine has. And of course, maintenance and staff are two of the high operating costs for any formal public transport service offer. But it goes much wider than that. We know that there is a huge ecosystem, a value chain around the introduction of e-mobility, and that includes the fact that electrical and mechanical engineering is actually much cleaner than ICEs and diesel, and you don't have to have grease up to your elbows and huge heavy machinery and a lot of maintenance on a very regular basis. The electric transition actually offers more opportunities for women to be trained in that maintenance area. We know also that women are quite often very good organizers, and we can actually play a very important role in the battery and infrastructure charging aspects that would also include, of course, battery disposal, which is a big pollution hazard. There's a lot of very interesting work going on, and some of it by women, in research and development. Here, I'd just like to remind you that in the historical aspect of transport, women have played a huge role in developing some parts of research and development which we just accept now. Safety belts, speed limits, windscreen wipers. They were all developed by women and introduced because they were felt to be an important part of the development of transport. And we need to also build knowledge about, okay, so how can we include more women and include increase the diversity of the workforce? And here I'd just like to highlight what Ola is doing in India, where they have an ambition to make the majority of their workforce, and they are producing e-vehicles, and the workforce is around 20,000. The majority they wish to have as female over a 2-year period. That's a really nice ambition and really important. So these are just some thoughts about the value chain. We often forget about the many and the many different entry points that we could encourage women to take part in. Which include the sale and also the design of vehicles. So these are, a lot of the words that come up when you do focus groups around e-mobility, and I have to take my hat off also to the summer project in Asia, who has actually been doing quite a lot of data collection around the inclusion discussion. So what do women want? What do elderly want? What do the youth want? How do they see EVs developing? What are their concerns? And of course, their concerns are very, very similar to men's concerns, but the context is quite different. So where might the best entry points for women be? Well, let's face it, there's certainly no lack of talent. The GIZ, the TUMI funded Women Mobilize Women, have been looking at identifying leading women over the past few years. I was one of the early recruits, if you like, way back in 2019, but they've had a number of publications now. And there are many women out there, and they're now documented. So let's just have a little look at some of them that come from the Asian region. So these ladies are high-level, powerful ladies. They are not part of the vulnerable group, low-income women who need a little bit of nudging here and there to maybe be able to increase their income. They are leaders. They are absolute leaders, and they have been recognized by, you know, people in their region as being leaders. So let's just have a little look at some of them in greater detail. So this lady is a member of the government of India. She has been leading the Convergent Energy Services Limited organization, and she is a managing director and CEO. You can read the text. I haven't got time to go through it, but it's very impressive. Others, like the lady who is the co-founder of Kinetic Green, which is now a leading manufacturer and supplier of 2- and 3-wheelers. She's also been listed as one of the top 30 women entrepreneurs in India. So we've got some very, very high-level women now climbing into the decision-making places. The general manager of transport organizations are increasingly becoming women. Again, this comes from the TUMI booklet of women. But obviously, we need to look at the reality, and it's not a perfect world out there. There are a number of challenges. I want to underpin the fact that we talk about gender, meaning women. We talk about women being vulnerable. We're not all the same. Women in Asia, as all over the world, are not just a homogenous group. We're not just low-income women who are desperate for a little bit of opportunity from time to time. That is not the lens that we need to put on. We need to look at it in a very holistic way. So stereotyping, and I've done a recent study internationally on this as to how women feel and experience working in transport. And stereotyping is one of the biggest challenges and barriers to retaining women in the sector. We know also that particularly in places like Asia, women still take on the lion's share, if you like, of the caring responsibilities. We need to also make sure that what we're doing is looking at really where the major growth in mobility is happening. Do we have the data? I don't think so. Do we have the disaggregated data? Definitely not. So this is really something that we need to improve, and this is where national governments and multilateral development agencies can really play a role in stimulating that data collection. And without having that data collection and evidence base, we don't know what's going to be impactful. Of course, getting 100 women driving buses is important, but to what extent does this have the impact that we are looking for? I also would like to just highlight, the work done by the Asian Transport Outlook on looking at the decrease, if you like, or stagnation of bus manufacture in Asia and around the world. So we need to make sure that we are looking in the right direction. There are also some key challenges that are linked to the empowerment of women. As women become more financially independent, I hate to say it, but the first thing they want to do is to buy a motor vehicle. They want to reject public transport, and they want their own car for safety, comfort, and independence reasons. So if we're not careful, we could look at building up the empowerment of women on the one side as an SDG, but that they develop into, let's say, the kind of young men of the 80s, and they are the ones that are buying the cars, although they might buy smaller cars. We need to know really whether that evidence is there or not. Do we at the moment? There is some evidence in America and Germany to say that women are the higher numbers of registration of vehicles than men. I don't know for Asia. There are also a lot of barriers, and cost is one of the key aspects that people fear, whether it's male or female. But we need to make sure that as we develop incentives and financial incentives, that they are adapted to the gender needs. And just to give you an example is, if you're buying an electric rickshaw, it's obviously 3 times or 4 times the amount of a normal rickshaw. But the payback is more difficult for women because they don't have the same option of working all hours of the day and night to pay back that loan. They need to still look after the family, and they can't rent out their e-rickshaw necessarily to another driver because that e-rickshaw is licensed under a female name. So we have to make sure that the financial incentives are also gender sensitive. The current models and timetables and rosters for working in transport, if you're on the operating side, are not very well adapted to women. And we need, therefore, to also maximize what women can bring rather than just fitting them into the existing kind of ICE paradigm. We need to make sure that women are encouraged in STEM education, and there's some very interesting, as I've mentioned, aspects of including women and women's perspective, and their different way of innovating can be very useful for developing the e-mobility market. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, I have to say it's all about the money. So let's have a little think about some suggestions, because a lot of the work that I do when I go and talk to people, and I say, well, what are you doing about gender? And they say, well, we've got it in our policies, but we don't really know what we need to do. So we need to make sure that there is greater capacity and understanding about what you can do and what is necessary to do. So we need to look more at the needs and requirements. Obviously, including the language is a key step forward, but we need to also invest in the capacity at national and local levels, and also at the operating level, and with women. Most women's organizations are looking at education, health development, but they're not actually making that connection with transport. It's a very opaque sector, and we need to try and make sure it's more transparent for women to make sure that they can see the opportunities. We need to design for women when we're making financial and other kinds of incentives. Improve data collection, please, please, please. Set up, obviously, initiatives and programs which are national and regional led. And you know, I see that I really welcome this new global program, and the leadership. And obviously, the big missing piece is very often we forget to evaluate and learn. So let's not miss this opportunity. This is a picture from the Dragon's Den, who many of you maybe know. And just to finalize, let me make a last plug for this survey that we're running out to look at particularly what is going on in the world, really, to encourage women into e-mobility, and where are the needs and gaps, looking at how we could use this to develop some more pilot projects. So thank you very much for your time. I know that it's been a bit of a roller coaster, and that I hope I haven't given you too many provocative thinking. So thank you. I hand it back to Tom now.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you so much for that. It was really, really powerful, powerful presentation. And in preparing actually for this, I googled how many CEOs within the Asia Pacific region were women, and the figure was just 4%, which not every woman wants to be a CEO. It's not every man does, but it's I think a useful indicator to just highlight the scale of the challenge that we face. And I thought, you know, you touched upon the matter of ICE paradigms in your presentation. I just think that we have an opportunity here in e-mobility. We're talking about a new paradigm and an emerging paradigm to really get some of the put some of the other building blocks in place, particularly around gender issues, and ensuring that we get it right from the start. Please do pose your questions to Heather in the Q&A. I'm sure that presentation has got you all thinking. If I could just kick it off, Heather, it'd be good to get, I think, some reflection on probably how, based on your experience working in lots of different organizations around the world, how well you see development banks such as ADB doing on gender issues at the moment. And I know you put some suggestions there on the slide at the end of your presentation, but if there were maybe two things that colleagues here from ADB and others could sort of take away to better embed gender in project design, what would they be?
Thanks. Yes, it's a bit of a tricky one, that. I know that I mean, almost all the development banks have now got gender in their strategies, so they know they have to do something. They have, already done a number of different kind of programs and initiatives, but I do see that they find it quite difficult for two aspects. One is that within the banks themselves, they have very few gender and transport experts. They maybe have a lot of gender experts, but they don't have that gender and transport intersection and knowledge. So that is difficult. They rely on the demands of their member countries, and a lot of the people who are their connections, their interlocutors in these different countries, know that they have to do something on gender, but are not really interested in it. So the gender language gets put into the projects via gender action plans and some fairly limited kind of targets that are put in, which people know that they can achieve. But there are two aspects that I would really like to encourage them to increase, and one would be to look at particularly upskilling. They have maybe a target for women working on the construction, but actually when the transport services are in operation, there's very little opportunity for women to have the permanent jobs. And the women that are working on the construction and they're not given the skills that they could take somewhere else so that they could get permanent jobs. So look at it in a more futuristic kind of way. And also particularly the financing area, and when we're looking at the e-mobility transition, these banks have enormous knowledge around microfinancing and developing those kind of programs, and yet very few I've seen have really been developed properly with a gender component in them or a gender lens on them. As I mentioned, the e-rickshaw issue, that initiative, a nice initiative, but actually the women were suffering because they couldn't pay back the loans. They couldn't work the longer hours to pay back the loans. And if a child was sick, they were working even less hours. So we need to have those kinds of things built in and understood. So, look at the finance options that really can be increased. Look at the capacity building, both within the banks and outside of the banks, and look at, initiatives that would help to build the pipeline for the technical kind of know-how, innovation and design in e-mobility that would be gender sensitive. But also, yes, support the obviously the policy development that links into gender and data collection. I forgot to mention, which is key.
Thanks so much, Heather. We have a few questions coming through in the Q&A, which is fantastic. The first one, which is from an anonymous attendee: what financial programs in Asia and Pacific can be provided to women who would like to purchase e-vehicles and use these for entrepreneurial activities?
There are a number of them, but yes, as I mentioned, they need to have the upfront capital costs are the biggest barrier, mainly for men and women to adopt e-vehicles. So we need to create more financial incentives, and at the national level, there should be also incentives that make sure that the transfer to e-vehicles is just and leaves no one behind. So that needs a nuancing in those incentive constructions and the architecture, as it were, of the incentives, to make sure that women have access to the financial loans. Let's face it, women have fewer assets than men. The capital kind of context that is put forward for most of the loans is still quite traditional. Banks are more used to lending to men than to women, and yet there are a number of very successful examples of where communities of women can actually club together and they can take the loans out. So they have these community banks which work extremely well through a gender lens. So that's options. But also, let's look at the charging infrastructure. Women can manage battery swapping extremely well. There's some examples coming from Africa which are quite interesting on that.
Thank you, Heather. And another question from Charlotte. So she says, when improving data collection, does this involve collecting new types of data? If so, what is missing, and what's the highest priority to start collecting, or more of a focus on disaggregation of data?
Well, the first step would be a focus on disaggregation of data. So that would be the first step, but also looking at it not only around behaviors, but also around actual purchase decisions. So how are the purchases of e-mobilities influenced? So this comes in a little bit less on the quantitative kind of technical side, a little bit more on the qualitative side. My experience in collecting data around gender and transport is that you need both. You cannot understand the gender dimension without having both. So quantitative data collection actually does not give you the gender insights that are needed, and you need to have the qualitative data collection. Unfortunately, in order to do that, you also need to have the gender analysis competence. So there are still, quite a lot of statistical bureaus that don't have that. So there's a capacity gap on that.
Thanks, Heather. And to ask, what are the top 3 actions that Heather would recommend to policymakers working in the transport field in DMCs, so developing member countries, to take to decrease EV-related gender inequalities? Thinking in terms of short and immediate term steps.
So one thing that would be really important was to make sure that in the EV roadmaps, they have a gender component, and it's not just the language of all measures should be gender inclusive or something or other, but they should have actually some specific actions with targets that are measured and evaluated. So there is a key entry point for women and others to enter into this market that is supported at the national level. So that would be first thing. Obviously, the second thing is to really increase the data and understanding. At the moment, the evidence base is really relatively weak, and it's weak from a gender perspective. So we still don't know really, whether it's women or men buying the e-scooters. If somebody can tell me the difference, I'd be very happy to have those statistics. So the data collection, again, is something which is absolutely core. And the third thing, which is quite important, I think, is to make sure that the institutions that are created around electric mobility and the transition to electric mobility have gender dimensions in them. So they need to make sure that they are including women in their employees, women in their design of programs, women are consulted, and that these institutions also connect with the major institutions that are gender focused to make sure that the transport connection, if you like, is made more robust between the actions of many of the kind of women's ministries and whatever, and the transition to EVs. So those are 3 areas which I think would really make a difference. There are many others that I could come up with, of course, but you asked for 3.
Heather, thank you so much, and I'm conscious you've got your contact details there on the screen for us. So if anybody would like to follow up with
Absolutely.
you and explore any of those issues further, and get the benefit of your wisdom, then they can do that. I'm a little conscious of time. We have run slightly over, so we'll bring this to a close. But Heather, thank you so much for giving up your time to come and present to us today on what is a really, really important topic area. And I know you've got your survey there on the screen as well. So if anyone has time to fill that out, please do.
Please do. Yes.
But otherwise, I think we'd just like to once again thank you, Heather, and thanks to you to everybody for joining, and hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, wherever you are. And just finally, the next webinar is Oslem Kildare, who will be presenting on green EV financing on the 29th of November. So we look forward to seeing hopefully many of you there for that as well. But thank you.
Thank you so much. And please fill the survey in if you are interested.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Heather, from our side as well.